everyone. If you're watching this video, then you are part of the TTOR army, an army that is building itself up one subscriber at a time. And as you can see from the title and thumbnail of today's video, today we have a doozy for you. First, we're going to look at and respond to a Christian man on a YouTube comment section who claims that it is God's will that 90% of Christian men do not get married. And then we're going to look at another Christian guy in a different YouTube video comment section who says that up to 80% of all the men and women in the human race on planet Earth are not worthy of being married. That's right. We're going into Crazyville. We're going into the dark corners of the internet when it comes to the deteriorating relationships between men and women. So strap in and prepare for a bumpy ride. Now, some time ago, I came across this video that you see here on screen titled Christian Men Stay Away from Dating. It's by Mark the Mimic. And Mark the Mimic's video was somewhat compelling because basically his whole argument is that modern dating is not biblical and there's all these problems that come when men try to engage in modern dating. And so basically he said in this video that Christian men need to just stay out of the whole concept of dating, and they need to stay off the dating apps, and they need to engage in an alternative to dating. And a lot of the points he made in this video were really good, and so I found his video somewhat compelling. But then he did another video called Christian Men Shouldn't Date Too, Alternative to Dating. And in this video, as you can see from the title, he laid out his alternative to dating that Christian men should engage in. I'm not going to play the video because it takes him basically the whole 19 minutes to lay out his alternative to dating, but this is what I will sum it up as. Basically, according to Mark the Mimic, Christian men, instead of engaging in dating as it exists today, instead of engaging in dating apps and pursuing women, what men should do instead is focus on being a good, godly man, take care of yourself physically, financially, all the self-improvement stuff that men should be doing anyway, and just make their lives better in general. Create an online presence for yourself, not on dating apps, but on like Facebook, Twitter, etc. And basically post pictures of yourself, post pictures of your work. If you're a content creator, share that there. Basically, just share content that shows your interests, your hobbies. Then you have to go to where women congregate, both in real life and online. If it's online, it'd be in like forums or Facebook groups, etc. And if it's in real life, it would be like at church or at like the grocery store or any other kind of community location where women tend to go to. And according to Mark the Mimic, if you do all of these things and you don't pursue women and you don't go to dating apps, what will happen is that if it's God's will for you to have a wife, God will cause your future wife to pursue you, and you won't have to pursue her at all, and you'll live happily ever after. And of course, if no woman pursues you after you do all these things consistently over an extended period of time, then the obvious conclusion to come to is that, well, clearly it was not God's will for you to be married and have a wife, so just get comfortable being single and serving at your church. Now, the obvious problem with this guy's alternative to dating is that it's already being tried in real life, has been for years, and it's been failing miserably. I mean, just go look at all the YouTube channels in the Christian sphere that cover relationships between men and women. You will find this all over the place. Christian men out there who are doing all of the things that Mark the Mimic said you should do as an alternative to dating, and they're not getting any interest from Christian women at all. They're the kinds of good, godly men that they're supposed to be, and Christian women, generally speaking, are not interested in them. So obviously his alternative to dating doesn't work. But when I went into the comments section of this video, that's where we found contestant number 1 in today's video. So, as you can hopefully see on screen, a guy named Alex Vig 2369 said, "Thing is, possibly you who reads this and 90% of the rest of the men of our generation simply weren't called for marriage given the state of women and society. Even the guys who do get married, many of them feel lonely and their wives neglect their needs. You're alone, but you're under no illusion that you have somebody." So yeah, according to this Alex Vig 2369 fella, 90% of Christian men are not called for marriage because of the state of women and society today. Literally, it is God's will for 90% of Christian men to not be married. So I proceeded to respond to good old Alex here by pointing out the obvious. How are Christian men supposed to obey God's command to be fruitful and multiply if marriage is the only God-approved way to do that, and 90% of them are allegedly not called to marriage due to the state of women and society? Why would God command us to get married instead of burning with lust when, according to you, 90% of us are not called to be married? Are we supposed to just burn with lust because we have no other way to deal with it due to the state of women and society? Obviously, I am referring to some very specific scriptures of my response. Let's see how Alex did with that. Alex said, TTOR, his was answered in one of the next videos. Basically, be fruitful and multiply was commanded upon Adam and Eve, not every single Christian out there. I even understood it before that video. So we got to stop him right there because he claims that this command to be fruitful and multiply only applied to Adam and Eve. And as we're going to see in Scripture, while that is technically true that Adam and Eve were the first ones to receive this command, other Scripture indicates that the command was not limited to just them. In Genesis chapter 1, 26 through 28 we read, "Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." So yes, this is day 6 of creation. This is God speaking to Adam and Eve right after he made them. And he said, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over everything. These guys are going to this passage and saying, well, this command only applies to Adam and Eve. It isn't a general command for all of humanity. Well, when you turn to Isaiah 45, verses 18 through 19, we read, "For this is what the Lord says, He who created the heavens, He is God. He who fashioned and made the earth, He founded it. He did not create it to be empty, but formed it to be inhabited. He says, I am the Lord and there is no other. I have not spoken in secret from somewhere in the land of darkness. I have not said to Jacob's descendants, seek me in vain. I, the Lord, speak the truth. I declare what is right." And verse 18 of Isaiah 45, God himself says that he did not create the earth to be empty. He formed it to be inhabited. In other words, his command to be fruitful and multiply did not apply to just Adam and Eve. It applied to every human being on the face of the earth. Because he says right here that he created the earth to be inhabited. So this idea that Adam and Eve were the only ones who were commanded to be fruitful and multiply, and it wasn't a general command to the entire human race, that is not even remotely true. It is a straight up lie. You could even argue it's straight up heresy. But then what does he say next? He says, also, people use having a lust problem too liberally to justify why they need a wife. You aren't entitled to a wife because you can't control your lust. It's up to God whether to give that to you or not. And for 90% of us, it's better not to, because half will get divorced anyway. Oh, that is some pure cope right there. So first of all, he said that people use having a lust problem too liberally to justify why they need a wife. The problem, of course, with saying this is that God himself, through the Apostle Paul, literally told unmarried people that if they struggled with lust, they needed to get married. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 8 through 9. In verses 1 through 7, Paul was talking to married people. Then he says this, now to the unmarried and the widows I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried as I do. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. In other words, according to the Apostle Paul, speaking directly to unmarried people as well as widows, he says that if you can't control yourself as an unmarried person, meaning you struggle with lust, you should get married, because it is better to be married than to struggle with lust as an unmarried person. That comes straight from Paul. So for this guy to claim that that is not true in any way, shape, or form is absolutely insane. We are literally commanded as unmarried people who struggle with lust to get married, according to the Apostle Paul, as the way of dealing with that problem. Now, it is true that you're not entitled to a wife, and it is true that it is up to God whether or not you get it. But to say that, well, 90% of Christian men should just stay single and not get married because half of them will get divorced anyway, that's just pure cope. So I said in response to Alex, why would God give virtually all Christian men sexual desires if his will for 90% of them was to never allow them to be in the one situation, marriage, that would allow them to act out their sexual desires? And of course, Alex never answers this question. Ever. Because that's a problem they cannot answer. It is a problem of logic that destroys his ideas, that destroys his claim that it's God's will for 90% of Christian men to not be married. Because if you read the Bible, you know that God created sex, and that he created sex to be between men and women in the context of marriage. So in other words, based on what the Bible explicitly teaches, marriage is the one situation where men are allowed to act on their sexual desires and have sex with women, and therefore make children with those women. That is the only time that sex is not a sin, biblically speaking. But if Alex is right, and it is the will of God that 90% of Christian men are to not be married, then it seems cruel and unusual that God would give all those Christian men, or at least the vast majority of them, sexual desires and a desire to get married and have a wife and have kids with that wife. It seems cruel and unusual for God to give them those desires if his will for 90% of them was that, oh yeah, you never get to be in the one situation that would allow you to act out on those sexual desires. Have fun with that, kids! That's the situation that Alex Vig is creating here. Now, at this point, when I first came across this stuff and had this conversation, I was hesitant to make a video about this encounter that I had because I felt like it was just a one-off situation. But then I came across this video, which you can see right here on screen, called "You've Been Lied to About Marriage." It's by a Catholic guy named Brian Holdsworth. And it is in the comments section of this video that I found someone similar to Alex, only worse. Now this guy, Christopher Larson 7788, has a bit of a rambling post, but you really need to hear this. He says, "Wow, Brian, props to you for even attempting a video on this topic. Marriage is a tough sale, and that's coming from a man who by the age of 16 already knew I wanted to be married and have 5 kids. I've been married now for almost 30 years, only 2 children, and I'm incredibly blessed, far beyond anything I could ever deserve. I've been wondering how to explain to a new generation of men why they should get married. I am staunchly pro-marriage and pro-natal, and yet in conversation after conversation, I hear and witness the pain of men in relationships, and I've gradually come to the regrettable conclusion that marriage is not worth the risk to men. What if most of us, say 70 or even 80%, aren't supposed to marry? I hear your message loud and clear. I agree with the benefits of marriage and how marriage and parenthood profoundly shape us to become whole beings. Of course, but that requires 2 willing humans. That is not the world we live in today. There are far too few men and women worthy of such a blessing or adventure. Fewer still will even take the risk precisely because the odds are so staunchly stacked against success. Said another way, if 1 in 3 careers ended in broken families, financial ruin, emotional trauma, and social shame, how could I advocate for any career choice in good faith? In that hypothetical context, I'd argue first for career reform, legal protection, and legislation designed to lessen the burden of unfaithful participants. I'm peering into my tea leaves here, but I think if we just let the institution of marriage and family fail for a generation or 2 or 3, maybe we'll find the men and women from that small 20% of men and women with faithful, loving, and generous hearts. We'll find each other in the dystopian madness. Perhaps we can rebuild humanity on those souls. Yeah, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. According to Christopher Larson 7788, 70 to 80% of all men and women on planet Earth are not supposed to be married. And the reason why they're not supposed to be married is, in his own words, they are not worthy of such a blessing or adventure. In other words, according to Christopher Larson 7788, only 20 to 30% of the men and women on planet Earth are worthy of the blessing and the privilege of being married. And according to Christopher Larson here, 70 to 80% of the men and women on planet Earth are not worthy of being married. And so those 70 to 80% of men and women on planet Earth, they need to just fall on their swords right now and have their bloodlines die out right here and now. And then the 20 to 30% that's left, that's all the people worthy of being married, well, they can go on and have kids and be married and just rebuild the human race and everything will be so great. As if sin doesn't exist in the lives of those 20 to 30%. My question to Christopher Larson here is, who gets to determine who the 20 to 30% of worthy people for marriage are? And who gets to determine who the 70 to 80% of unworthy people are? By what standard, by what judgment are we making these decisions by? And who makes those judgments and those decisions? You? Some panel of people? Who makes those calls? Just absolutely insane. I said in response to him, 70 to 80% of men and women are not meant to be married? Why on earth would God give us sexual desires in order to be fruitful and multiply, Genesis 1:28, Genesis 9, and inhabit the earth, Isaiah 45:18, if his will for 70 to 80% of us is to not be married and therefore not procreate or have any kind of sexual release that isn't sinful? Christopher actually responded to me, and, well, I can't say it was a good response. He said, TTOR, I'm confused. Are you saying God is sinful or that humans are sinful? Yeah, I have no idea how he came to the conclusion I said that God is sinful. I mean, humans are sinful. Do you believe the hairless monkeys called humans are somehow exalted? We're not. We're mere animals. The only animals kicked out of the paradise of Eden, mind you, so yes, sinful. Why would the almighty and loving God make us so pathetically flawed and frail? I don't know. The brutal reality is that most of us are not going to heaven. We will not find peace in the grace of God. I don't make the rules. I'm not saying God created us to fail, exactly the opposite. Failure, pain, misery, loneliness, these are not the things God wants for us. Instead, I'm saying 70 to 80% of people worship money, power, sex, celebrity, drugs, and or vanity. Humans are the ape that worships. If we don't worship God, we'll worship something else that will bring us into darkness. That's what most of us do. I'm only guessing here, but it sounds like you have a much higher opinion of humans than I do. I've never bought into the mythology that humans are advancing toward a perfect existence as pure energy, which I never brought this up, so I don't know why he's bringing it up. The opposite. I see nothing about modern humans that suggests any advancement from humans who lived 300,000 years ago. So it was at this point that I figured out that I was talking to a theistic evolutionist, which means he's already a heretic in relation to the Bible. But he really didn't address anything I had to say, as you can see here. And then, as I was looking at the comment section here, I noticed that Christopher Larson has over 19,000 subscribers, and I went, no way, this guy's a content creator? I have to see who this lunatic is. And sure enough, you go to his channel and he really does have over 19,000 subs. He hasn't uploaded a video in a couple of years, but he technically has uploaded 68 videos, and some of them get quite a few views. In fact, if you go to by his popular feed, he has a video of 138,000 views, and he has a couple that have tens of thousands of views. And that's clearly how he built up his 19,500 subscribers, is with hits like that. However good this guy is in making videos about military tactics and military tech, he's an absolute lunatic when it comes to the deteriorating relationships between men and women and how to remedy that. Now, when I sit here and I think about these two people, I am seeing a pattern here. You got one Christian guy way over here who's saying that it is allegedly God's will that 90% of Christian men are not called to marriage, and they just need to fall on the sword, and they need to let their bloodline die right here and now. And then you got this theistic evolutionist over here saying that 70 to 80% of the men and women on planet Earth are not worthy of being married, and therefore they need to fall on their swords and their bloodlines right now and let the remaining 20 to 30% go on to marry and have kids and rebuild the human race in their superior image. When I see stuff like this, I think of the globalists. I think of the 500 million club, as my dad calls them, because the globalists at the end of the day want to reduce the population of the planet Earth from the 7 to 8 billion people who are on it now. They want to reduce it down to 500 million people because they've arbitrarily declared that the Earth can only sustain the lives of 500 million people in a way that is good. And so the rest of us, over time, just need to die. And so I can clearly see from the teachings of people like Christopher Larson and Alex that these people are being powered by the same spirit that powers the globalists, that powers the 500 million club. These people are participating indirectly in the plans of the 500 million club, because if we can just convince whole generations of Christian men, whole generations of men and women in general, to just fall on their swords and never get married, never have kids. Just end your bloodline right now because you're not worthy of being married and having kids. If they can successfully convince whole generations of men and women to do that, then real progress towards reducing the population of the earth down to 500 million people can be made. And it's absolutely disgusting. We live in bleak times, ladies and gentlemen. We live in very bleak times, especially if you're a Christian, especially if you are a man, especially if you're a Christian man who's in his 20s and he feels like he's largely invisible and that his life doesn't matter. If you're a Christian man who's in your late 20s to mid 30s, you're single and you're childless, and you're wondering if you'll ever get to have those things in life, and you're just trying to get to a point where you could even potentially provide for someone. I feel your pain and I understand your plight, and it is wackadoos like the people that we discussed in this video that you need to just flat out reject. I would say ignore them, but I have a feeling that their opinion is going to become, well, a larger share of the opinions of people in the Christian world at some point, and larger opinions of people in the world in general. So be aware of people like this, but utterly reject what they're teaching you about the vast majority of human beings being unworthy of marriage, about God's will for 90% of Christian men is to never be married and never have kids and to just fall on their sword and die. You have to reject all of that if you are a man who's in the positions I described. Live for the Lord. Take care of yourself. Do God's will for your life, whatever that will is. And I can promise you, by the end of your life, if you're doing God's will, it may not be easy, it may be really hard, you may have to deal with loneliness and depression and sadness. I know I do in many of the years of my life, but it will be worth it in the end if you belong to God, because once you belong to God and once your time on this earth is over, you will be in paradise with the Lord. And all of those struggles that you go through in this life won't mean anything. It'll be worth it to get to the end and be with the Lord for eternity. See you in the next video.